I'm not here to marry. I just want to cook. The words left on Lee's lips before she could stop them, quiet but sharp enough to cut through the low hum of gossip in Miller's Mercantile. Three women, their faces pinched with the self-importance of town matriarchs, stared at her. Mrs. Gable, the mayor's wife, let her gaze travel down An Lee's frame, from the tightly coiled black hair at her nape to the dusty hem of her dark red prairie dress. The dress was her only possession of quality, sewn with small, neat stitches that spoke of a life left far behind. It felt like armor, but against the weight of their judgment, it was as thin as paper. An advertisement for a cook is not an open invitation for your kind, Mrs. Gable said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. An Lee's hands tightened on the worn handle of her satchel. Inside, a small, chipped porcelain bowl and a set of polished wooden chopsticks were wrapped in cloth, the last tangible pieces of her grandmother. She had traveled for weeks, propelled by a desperate hope that felt foolish now, under these merciless gazes. The advertisement had been specific. Cook and housekeeper wanted for rancher, widower with one child, room and board provided. There was no mention of marriage, no hint of a mail-order bride arrangement, yet that was all these women saw. They saw her face, her almond-shaped eyes, and drew their own conclusions, weaving a narrative of desperation and impropriety that had nothing to do with her skill with a skillet, and everything to do with their fear of the unknown. She was 18, alone, and had precisely $4 to her name. Humiliation was a luxury she could not afford. "I am a very good cook," she repeated, her voice steadier this time, though a tremor ran through her. The bell above the mercantile door chimed, announcing a new arrival and offering a momentary reprieve. A man filled the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the harsh afternoon sun. He was tall and weathered, his face a landscape of sun-etched lines and quiet grief. Dust clung to his boots and the brim of his hat, which he removed as he entered, revealing dark, serious hair. A small girl, no older than 7, clung to his hand. Her face was pale, her frame delicate, and her large, solemn eyes seemed to absorb everything without comment. This had to be him, Jacob Thorne, the lone rancher. The women immediately shifted their attention, their sharp expressions melting into practiced sympathy. "Mr. Thorne, such a trial for you, raising that dear child alone," one of them cooed. He gave a curt nod, his gaze sweeping over them before landing on An Lee. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a weary assessment. He had seen her standing there, had felt the tension coiling in the air. "I'm An Lee," she said, stepping forward, deciding that waiting to be dismissed was a fate worse than being rejected outright. "I've come about the position." Jacob Thorne's eyes, the color of a stormy sky, met hers. He looked from her to his daughter, Lily, whose small hand was still lost in his. The child was watching An Lee with an unnerving intensity, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze. "She can't possibly manage a ranch kitchen," Mrs. Gable inserted herself, her voice sharp again. "A girl like that—" He held up a hand, silencing her without a word. The authority in the simple gesture was absolute. He addressed An Lee directly, his voice a low rumble. "Can you make biscuits?" It was a simple question, yet it held the weight of her entire future. She met his gaze without flinching. "I can make biscuits that will make you forget every other you've ever tasted. I can make stews that will warm you on the coldest night, and broths that can soothe a fever. I can cook." A long silence stretched between them, the air thick with the scent of dried goods and the town's disapproval. Finally, he gave another short nod. "Get your things. The wagon's outside." The ride to the ranch was silent and dusty. An Lee sat in the back of the wagon clutching her satchel, the rhythmic creak of the wheels a stark contrast to the frantic beating of her heart. The landscape was vast and unforgiving, a canvas of baked earth and endless sky that seemed to swallow her whole. Jacob Thorne said nothing, his attention fixed on the horses, his back a rigid wall between her and the world. Lily sat beside him, occasionally glancing back at An-Li, her expression a mixture of caution and curiosity. When they finally arrived, the ranch house was just as stark as the land it occupied. It was a sturdy, practical structure, but a profound sadness clung to it like the dust. Inside, the air was stale. A fine layer of grime covered every surface, and the main room was filled with the quiet clutter of a life interrupted. But it was the kitchen that took An-Li's breath away. It was a space hollowed out by grief. A stack of dirty dishes sat in a basin of greasy water. The stove was cold and coated in soot, and the pantry shelves were a chaotic jumble of half-empty tins and bags of weevil-infested flour. For anyone else, it would have been a vision of despair. For An-Li, it was a promise, a challenge. This was a place she could command, a chaos she could tame. This was a sanctuary waiting to be reclaimed. She set her satchel on the floor, untied the ribbons of her bonnet, and rolled up the sleeves of her red dress. Her hands, which had been trembling in the mercantile, were now steady. Here, surrounded by neglect and sorrow, she knew what to do. She started with the water, hauling buckets from the well until her shoulders ached. Heating them on the stove she had to scrub clean first. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening, a silent, determined force against the entropy of the house. Lily appeared in the doorway, a ghost in a cotton nightgown, watching her with those big, silent eyes. She didn't speak, but she stayed, her presence a quiet testament to the change already beginning to stir in the silent, lonely house. For her first meal, An-Li kept it simple. There was no room for artistry yet, only for nourishment. She made a thick beef stew, simmering the tough cuts of meat for hours with wild onions and carrots she found in the root cellar, until the beef was tender enough to fall apart with a fork. The aroma, rich and savory, began to creep out of the kitchen, pushing back against the stale air of the house. It was a smell of life, of care, a scent the walls had not known for a very long time. And she made biscuits. She worked the dough with a light, practiced hand, her grandmother's voice a soft echo in her mind, guiding her movements. They rose in the oven, golden and fluffy, their tops brushed with the last of some churned butter she'd found. When she called them to the table, Jacob came first, his expression unreadable as he sat down. Lily followed, sliding into her chair, her eyes fixed on the steaming bowl An-Li placed before her. They ate in silence. An-Li didn't dare sit with them, instead busying herself at the stove, her back to them, every muscle tense as she waited for a verdict. She heard the scrape of a spoon against a bowl, then another. She heard a small sigh from Lily. She risked a glance over her shoulder. Jacob was halfway through his stew, his movements slow and deliberate. He picked up a biscuit, broke it in half, and dipped it into the gravy. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. Lily, the pale, thin child who Jacob had warned her barely ate a thing, was meticulously cleaning her bowl. When she was finished, she looked up, not at her father, but directly at An-Li. "Thank you," she whispered. The word so soft it was almost lost in the quiet of the room. It was the first time An-Li had heard her speak. A warmth spread through An-Li's chest, more potent than any praise from a king. Later, after she had cleared the plates, both of them empty, Jacob stopped her as she headed to her small room off the kitchen. "The last cook lasted 2 days," he said, his voice low. "The one before that, a week." He didn't say more, but he didn't have to. The unspoken words hung in the air. "You can stay." The days bled into weeks, each one marked by the rhythm of the kitchen. An-Li rose before the sun, the cool floorboards a shock to her bare feet, and stoked the fire in the stove. The kitchen became her world, a place where she could translate her sorrow and her hope into something tangible, something that could heal. She learned the landscape of the pantry, the quirks of the old iron stove, the way the afternoon light slanted through the single window. She made congee for Lily when the child felt poorly, a warm, silken rice porridge that was both food and medicine. She learned that Jacob liked his coffee black and strong, and that he had a fondness for the apple pie she made, its crust flaky and its filling spiced with a hint of cinnamon she'd carefully carried with her from the city. Lily began to blossom. The paleness in her cheeks was replaced by a healthy flush, and the silence that had shrouded her began to recede. She followed Anli around the kitchen, a small, curious shadow, asking questions in her soft voice. "Why do you fold it like that?" she'd ask as Anli pleated the edges of a dumpling. "My grandmother taught me," Anli would reply. "She said you fold your wishes into the dough." Jacob remained a reserved, distant figure, but the change in him was palpable. The hard, protective shell he wore around his heart began to show the faintest of cracks. He would linger in the kitchen after a long day's work, nursing a cup of coffee, the weary lines around his eyes softening in the warm, fragrant air. He watched her work, the quiet efficiency of her movements, the care she put into every task. One afternoon, a brutish ranch hand named Bart made a crude remark as she was hanging laundry, his eyes lingering on her in a way that made her skin crawl. Before she could even react, Jacob was there, his presence sudden and immense. "You will show Miss Anli the respect she is due," he said, his voice dangerously low, "or you will find yourself walking off this ranch before sunset." Bart stammered an apology and fled. Jacob didn't look at her, but the message was clear. He was her protector. In the quiet fortress of the Thorn Ranch, she was safe. The annual Founders' Day picnic was the most important social event of the year in their small corner of the world. It was a day of polite competition, where a woman's worth was often measured by the quality of the pie she brought. When Jacob informed Anli that they would be attending and that he needed her to prepare a dish, a cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. This meant facing them again. It meant subjecting her work, her heart, to the judgment of Mrs. Gable and the others. It was one thing to earn the quiet approval of a grieving man and a lonely child. It was another entirely to face the collective scorn of the town. I don't know what to make," she stammered, her confidence wavering for the first time in weeks. "Make what you make here," Jacob said simply, his faith in her absolute. "Make it good." His words were not a comfort. They were a command, a weight of expectation. For 2 days she barely slept. The kitchen became her battleground. She decided against a simple pie or a common casserole. They would be expecting that, ready to compare it unfavorably to their own. She would give them something they had never seen before. She would give them a piece of herself. She spent hours meticulously crafting dozens of delicate dumplings, filling them with seasoned pork and vegetables, each one a perfect pleated jewel. And she baked a savory chicken and mushroom pie, but with a pastry so light and layered, it practically melted on the tongue, the top adorned with an intricate lattice that was a work of art. As she worked, she poured all her fear, her defiance, and her desperate need to belong into the food. This was more than lunch. It was her declaration, the same one she had made in the Mercantile, but this time spoken not in words, but in flour and fat and fire. When she packed the basket, her hands were steady. She was terrified, but she was also ready. She had found her voice in this kitchen, and now she would make them listen. The picnic was a sea of pastel dresses and straw bonnets, the air thick with the smell of roasted meat and the high-pitched chatter of gossip. As An-Li walked beside Jacob, carrying the heavy basket, she felt hundreds of eyes on her. The whispers followed them like a swarm of insects. She saw Mrs. Gable holding court near the dessert table, her eyes narrowing as they approached. An-Li's heart hammered against her ribs. She placed her dishes on the long communal table, nestled between a lumpy potato salad and a slightly burnt cornbread. Her pie, with its golden brown lattice, and her platter of perfectly arranged dumplings looked alien, exotic, and entirely out of place. For a long while no one touched them. People would glance, whisper to their neighbor, and then move on, filling their plates with familiar, safe fare. Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at An-Li's eyes. She wanted to disappear. She felt a small hand slip into hers. It was Lily, standing beside her, her small chin held high in a gesture of fierce loyalty. "It's the best," the little girl said loudly, her voice clear and true, drawing the attention of a few nearby families. Then the minister, a kind man with a hearty appetite, ambled over. "Well now, what have we here?" he boomed, spearing a dumpling with his fork. He popped it into his mouth. A look of profound surprise crossed his face. "Good heavens, Martha," he called to his wife. "You must try this." Slowly, hesitantly, others began to venture forward. A teenage boy, then a few of the more adventurous men. A hush began to fall over the immediate area, replaced by murmurs of appreciation. "Did you taste this? Where did it come from?" Soon, a small crowd had formed around her dishes. The dumplings vanished first, and then slices of the savory pie were carved away until nothing but crumbs remained. Mrs. Gable watched from a distance, her face a mask of disbelief and thinly veiled fury. A few women, their curiosity overriding their prejudice, approached An-Li. "That was quite something," one admitted grudgingly. "What do you call those little things?" An-Li stood taller, Lily's hand still firmly in hers, and met their gazes. She had won. That evening, a profound quiet settled over the ranch. The air was cool and smelled of dry grass and distant rain. Lily, exhausted from the day's excitement, had fallen asleep almost immediately after dinner. An-Li stepped out onto the porch, wrapping her arms around herself as she looked up at the vast, star-dusted sky. She felt a quiet sense of triumph, a feeling so new and fragile she was almost afraid to acknowledge it. The screen door creaked open behind her. It was Jacob. He didn't speak for a long time, simply stood beside her, his presence a solid and comforting weight in the darkness. "You shamed them today," he finally said, his voice a low rumble, "with a pie." A small smile touched her lips. "I just wanted to cook." He turned to face her, the faint moonlight carving his rugged features out of the shadows. "You do more than cook, An-Li." The way he said her name sent a soft shiver through her. "This place, it was just a house before you came, just walls and a roof. My wife, Sarah, she was the heart of it. When she died, the heart stopped beating. I didn't know how to start it again." It was the first time he had ever spoken of her, and the vulnerability in his voice was a revelation. It was a gift of trust, offered in the quiet dark. Lily wouldn't eat. She wouldn't talk. She was fading away, and I was watching it happen, and I didn't know what to do. He looked down at his hands, large and calloused from work, hands that could tame a horse or mend the fence, but were helpless to mend his own daughter. "You brought her back," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The food, yes, but it's more than that. The warmth, the care. You brought the heart back to this house. You brought my daughter back to me." In that moment, under the endless Wyoming sky, the space between them shimmered with unspoken feelings, with a connection that ran deeper than gratitude, deeper than employment. He saw her, truly saw her, not as his cook, not as an outsider, but as the woman who had quietly and gracefully healed his broken family. From that night on, the dynamic in the house shifted. The professional distance between them dissolved, replaced by a tentative, gentle intimacy. It was a romance written in small gestures, a language of quiet care. He started leaving a single, resilient wildflower on the kitchen windowsill for her each morning, picked from the harsh, dry soil, a small splash of color in her world. She, in turn, began to save him the corner piece of the cornbread, the one she knew he liked best, leaving it on a plate for him after his long days. The kitchen, once just her workspace, now felt like the true center of their shared life, a place of warmth and comfort where they would talk late into the night after Lily was asleep. He would tell her about the ranch, about his dreams for the land, and she would tell him stories of her grandmother, of the flavors and scents of a life she had been forced to leave behind. He listened with an intensity that made her feel valued, understood. Her initial declaration, "I just want to cook," had been a shield, a wall she built to protect herself from a world that wanted to define her as a wife, a possession. Cooking was her skill, her independence. But here, with Jacob and Lily, she began to understand that her desire wasn't just about the act of cooking itself. It was about creating a home, about nurturing, about caring for people who had come to mean everything to her. One evening, as they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire dance in the hearth, he reached across the space between them and took her hand. His touch was warm and sure. "An-Lee," he began, his voice serious, "you know you are more than just my cook. You know this is more than just a job." She met his gaze, her heart swelling with an emotion so powerful it stole her breath. "I know," she whispered. "This is your home now," he said, the words a solemn vow. "If you'll have it." It was not a question of employment, but a question of the heart. He was offering her a place to belong, freely and without condition. The following Sunday, Jacob hitched the wagon and announced they were all going into town. But this time, An-Lee did not feel the familiar dread. She sat on the wagon seat between Jacob and Lily, a part of the family, not just an employee trailing behind. She wore her dark red dress, but it no longer felt like armor. It felt like a celebration. As they walked through the town, the atmosphere was different. The whispers were still there, but they were tinged with respect, with envy. The women who had once looked through her now nodded in greeting. Mrs. Gable watched them pass, her expression sour, a queen dethroned by a girl with nothing but a skillet and a strong heart. That afternoon, back in the warm sanctuary of her kitchen, with the scent of baking bread filling the air, Jacob came to stand beside her. Lily was outside chasing butterflies in the yard, her laughter drifting in through the open window. "I told you once that I was not looking for a wife," Jacob said softly, his eyes searching hers. "And you told the whole town you were not here to marry." A smile played on her lips. "I just wanted to cook." "I know," he said, his voice growing tender. "But I find myself wanting more than a cook. I want a partner. I want a mother for my daughter. I want a wife." He took her hands, his thumbs gently stroking her skin. "I want you, An-Lee, to stay here with us, to build a life with us. Not because you have to, but because you choose to." Tears welled in her eyes, tears of joy, of relief, of a profound and overwhelming sense of peace. The proposal was not a trap, not an obligation, but a destination she had reached on her own terms. It was a testament to her worth, a worth she had proven with her own two hands. She had come here seeking refuge in a job, and in the process she had built a family. "Yes," she said, her voice full of emotion. "Yes, Jacob." He pulled her into his arms, and in his embrace, surrounded by the home she had brought back to life, An-Lee knew she had found everything she had ever been searching for. Thank you for watching this story. We hope it warmed your heart. If you enjoyed An-Lee's journey, please show your support by hitting the like button, leaving a comment with your favorite part, and subscribing to our channel for more inspirational short films. Your engagement helps us continue to create and share stories that matter.